take a moment now to just pause in our day. We live in a world that is messy, that is painful and joyful at the same time, and that brings violence into the lives of some and blessing into the lives of others, sometimes both at the same time. So I'd like us just now, get settled in your seat, your feet comfortable on the floor, your hands in your lap, and we'll take a moment of quiet silence together in this room, holding in our hearts all those whose lives are wounded by violence, all of those who do the wounding, all of those whose lives are blessed with abundance, and all of those who do the blessing. Breathe deeply now for a moment of collective silence. May all find hope. May all be blessed with peace. And may all be held in the arms of love. The reading I want to share with you this morning comes from the Reverend Victoria Safford, who's minister of our congregation, the White Bear congregation in Minnesota. It's called Table Blessing. At my house at supper, she says, we perform the most unholy and untidy little liturgy you can imagine. But I usually think it works. Other families I know conduct their affairs with more elegance and style, but elegance is not our strength. At our house, she says, the table grace we do does not look like religion. It looks like a tired, hungry, tattered family at the end of a tattered day, sometimes at the end of its rope. We scramble to find the matches, to clear and set the table, to dislodge the cats and scrape our chairs into place. We clatter in and then get up again to wash someone's hands, and then finally sit down. We light the candles, reach for each other's hands, close our eyes and sit in silence for as long as the youngest among us can stand it, which is generally up to as high as she can count. Then on most nights we sing something. Dona nobis pacem, jubilate Deo, shalom, the old 100th, over the river and through the woods. The wheels on the bus go round and round. We try to be serious, but really, it doesn't matter what we sing. We are in a self-imposed time out. The smell of the food becomes real, the sound of our breath and the feel of our damp hands still sticky. These are real. We are together, our circle invincible in this one holy moment, and each of us utterly alone in the dark solitude behind closed eyes. We are home. We have food. We recall that many don't, and sometimes someone says this in a blessing. And where we have been in the day and where we may go that night or tomorrow fades away for a time, and we are infused. And time is infused, and something wells up. Something like gratitude wells up, nigh unto overwhelming. The whole thing lasts from candle to song about 2 minutes, but the echo, the wake of it, lasts longer. We are trying, all of us, in all of our houses, to be aware. We are trying to be quiet. We're trying to slow down. We are trying to remember our true and real life. We're trying to touch that, to call it up, trying to know that we are alive, hoping to mold that knowing into good work, hopeful, brave, and helpful later on. We are trying to remember what we love and what to do and how to be ourselves. Good gifts. And we'll stay seated now as we sing hymn number 4 in your hymnal. I brought my spirit to the trees, a hymn about those moments of quiet and reflection.
brought my spirit to the sea. I stood upon the shore. I gazed upon infinity. I heard the waters roar. And then there came a sense of peace, and whispered on my soul, some ancient ministry of stars had made my spirit whole. I brought my spirit to the trees that loomed against the sky. I touched each wandering careless breeze to know if God was mine. And then I felt an inner flame that fiercely burned my tears. Upright I rose from bended knee to meet the asking years.
Stories are important things. It matters what stories we tell each other and our children. They have a power that other ways of communication do not. Philip Pullman, the author of The Golden Compass and its sequels, says, "We don't need lists of rights and wrongs, tables of do's and don'ts. We need books, time, and silence. Thou shalt not is soon forgotten," he says, "but once upon a time lasts forever." Well-crafted stories have ways of creeping into our hearts and our minds and showing us new things and new ways to see old things. And so it matters what stories we tell. When we tell stories of fear and hatred of all that is not us, we build a world of fear and hatred. In this country, we seem to be increasingly unable to relate to each other as equals, as subjects with whom to be in relationship rather than as objects on whom to act. This inability is engendered, encouraged, and exacerbated, I think, by systems, organizations, and individuals who inspire fear, paranoia, and hatred in us because they benefit from keeping us unstable and scared and demand that we not actually think about the world that we live in. Think about the increasingly shrill and deeply disturbing debates on contraception and marriage equality and military international intervention over the past few months. What stories are being told by Rush Limbaugh and his ilk on all faces of the political spectrum? And what stories are not being told? Our task as religious people, I believe, is not to shout these people down, though the temptation is certainly there. Our task is to tell a different story. A story of love and relationship, of understanding and collaborative power, rather than one of fear, paranoia, and alienation. To model a different way of living in relationship and community, and to engage in conversation and collaboration with all of those around us, whether they agree with us or not. To show that sharing this life on this world is necessary, rather than merely living side by side. This is what I meant last time I was with you when I said we need to respond from love and not fear, even to those whose ideas and convictions we detest. And so what about the name of the tree? Well, when I was a child, I had an orange plastic record player. I loved my little record player and was constantly plugging it in and listening to the Disney records I shared with my brother and to my disco Star Wars record. You remember that one? Yeah. But my favorite record was Danny Kaye Tells Stories from Around the World. Danny Kaye told stories like Master of Masters and Nail Soup, but my favorite story was The Name of the Tree, a version of the story I told you earlier. Now, Kaye's version of the story had several differences. The biggest being the tree had a different name. For Danny Kaye, the name of the tree was Uwangalema. I listened to this story over and over and over again. Can you imagine hearing Danny Kaye say, "Uwakalema" over and over again? And eventually I outgrew my little orange plastic record player and started using my dad's stereo downstairs. And at some point my Danny Kaye record broke or disappeared, as these things do. But the story stuck with me. Years later, when I was about to begin my first teaching practicum as a student teacher on Salt Spring Island in British Columbia, I was searching through a children's bookstore for resources and came across Celia Barker Lottridge's version of The Name of the Tree. I took it with me into my kindergarten class that spring, and it has traveled with me ever since, into other classrooms, into bedtime stories with my niece, nephews, and goddaughter, into story times at Barnes & Noble when I ran the children's department there. It did more than travel with me, though. It became scripture to me. It became a story I could return to over and over again and constantly find new and deeper meaning and metaphor. And like any scripture, any good story, it said as much about my life as it did about its own characters. So what can we hear about our lives in the name of the tree? We could explore power structures that give some knowledge and power that others have to ask for on bended knee. We could explore just what is it that that fruit represents. We could explore what it means that the knowledge reaches the animals because the king made a mistake. And what about that darn rabbit hole? And all of these things are interesting and important to the story and what it might mean to us, but what I'd like to focus on today is those three animals: the gazelle, the elephant, and the small, slow tortoise, and their different approaches to gaining the knowledge and power of the name of the tree and their differing success. Now, the things we seek in life can come to us for many reasons. Many of the things we value in society, wealth, power, influence, fame, can come to us because of who we are, because we're born to them, because they are granted to us by our status. We can be the elephant, proud of who we are, secure in our status and unaware and not paying attention. But the deeper things we seek and need in life cannot come to us through heredity or privilege. The gazelle has great talent and great ability, and he knows it. Things come easily to him. Many of our successes in our lives can come to us through raw, basic talent, unasked for and unearned. I know what has happened to me in my own life when things like school came easy to me and then I ran into something I couldn't do easily. I was lost. How do I learn what I can't already do? When I was a freshman at the University of Toronto, I signed up for a Tai Chi class. Now, I only lasted a couple of lessons because it was really very hard and very different from anything I'd done before, and I had no frame of reference for how to do something new and difficult with my body. Other things had come so easily to me, and so I dropped out of Tai Chi class and didn't try it again for years. But the tortoise, the poor, small, slow, unassuming tortoise who brings the animals the knowledge they need to access life, how does he do it? Not just hard work. The elephant and the gazelle both work as well. They both walk across the plain. But the tortoise has a plan. He has discipline and a practice. He has a habit he develops to allow him to gain what he needs most deeply, what his community needs most deeply. A little chant, over and over again. Ungali, Ungali, the name of the tree is Ungali. Now, when I returned to the practice of Tai Chi 8 years ago, I was much humbler and acknowledged ahead of time that this would be hard for me and that I'd have to commit to practicing regularly if I was going to gain any benefit from the Tai Chi form. In fact, that's specifically why I returned to Tai Chi. And while I haven't been perfect, my Tai Chi teacher, will attest to that. It's been a much more deep learning I've done because I've committed to the process. I also understand, like anything important, I'm not going to have learned it for good one day. It's a lifelong commitment to practice. The Polish pianist Paderewski once said, "If I miss one day of practice, I notice it. If I miss 2 days, the critics notice it. If I miss 3 days, the audience notices it. In our attempt to access the benefits of a spiritually centered life, in our attempts at a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, in our work of building covenanted community, in our desire to respond to each and every person out of love, which animal is more potent and powerful and useful as a guide? My money is on the tortoise. 2 summers ago, I served a 12-week chaplaincy internship at a Southside Chicago hospital. Aside from our duties in dealing with crises in the emergency department and around the hospital, we spent time every day visiting patients in our assigned wards. This would mean seeing many different patients, one after another, often in a very short time, and often dealing with very powerful issues around death and illness, acceptance, hope, and grieving. It is a challenging thing to move from patient to patient to patient and be present and respectful to each without completely draining yourself in the process. One of my colleagues developed a small practice for herself. Before she visited with a patient, she would pause outside their room, say the patient's name several times, and invite her God to enter the room before her. In this way, she entered each room with the patient in her heart and mind and sacred presence as her goal. Saying a prayer or taking time for meditation in the morning were also important for many of us, but this small practice of hers had a profound effect on my colleague's ability to minister to her patients. When she didn't do it regularly, she felt less present. When it was a regular practice, her presence was calm and centered on the patient. I said earlier in this sermon that the story has become scripture for me. Many Christians and those of other faiths interact with scripture through the practice of Lectio Divina. In Lectio Divina, the practitioner encounters a passage of scripture in 4 ways: by reading it, meditating on its meaning, praying from what it has stirred up in their heart, and finally resting with the text, contemplating it. The Unitarian Universalist blogger known as Chutney, people pick interesting names online, talked about the kinds of texts appropriate for Lectio Divina, what he calls wisdom literature. What is wisdom literature, he asks, and answers himself. Wisdom literature is literature that reads you. You may read it well enough, but if you're paying attention at all, it holds you in its gaze and mirrors you back to yourself. And yet, you'll find something fuller and larger than yourself in it, something that will linger after you've put it down. That something will challenge you, and if you devote enough time to it, even a little, it will change you. Promise. You don't need to believe that any particular piece of wisdom literature is divine writ for spiritual reading to work for you. You just need something that will read you. And this is what the story of the tortoise and the tree has become for me. Wisdom literature, scripture. And my most recent returns to this story reflected back to me what I described earlier about spiritual practice and more. What lingers for me is a connection between spiritual practice, the disturbing political and social rhetoric abounding in the media, and what all this means to this liberal faith that we all share and commit to. This liberal faith of ours is not mine because I was born to it, even if I was. The elephant can forget and stumble if she doesn't pay attention. It's not mine just because it fits with the way I see the world, even if it does. The gazelle can be tripped up if he's distracted or thwarted. This liberal faith of ours is mine, and I think all of ours, because I commit to it every day, because I struggle with it every day, because I practice it every day. Our tradition has no creed, but it is for me guided and shaped in many ways by those principles we affirm and promote, those principles listed inside each of the hymnals on your chairs. In many ways, creeds are easy. For me, these principles of ours are hard, complex, and challenging. They don't ask what I believe. They call me to test that belief daily, in community, to live it out in community. They don't tell me what is holy. They call me to search for it constantly, in humility. They don't ask me where I get my strength. They demand that I use that strength, always in service. This is not an easy task, friends. I've had conversations with those in other more conservative traditions who think that we have it easy, not having to be accountable to creeds and canon law. We who dismiss us because they see a lack of rigor in our religious lives. But it's hard work building a liberal faith, a vital liberal faith. It's hard work building the world we hope for. Hard work choosing love over fear in each and every moment. It is profoundly difficult, day in and day out, to find the name of our tree, to reach that fruit. And there are rabbit holes everywhere. It's daunting, and we are never perfect. But as Garrison Keillor so wisely said, we do the best we can. We do the very best we can, and tomorrow, God willing, we get to wake up and try again. Ungali, Ungali, the name of the tree is Ungali, 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 the name of the tree is Ungali. May it be so in all our lives. Blessed be. And now we're going to sing one of the great